In this video, we explore why your mind works differently. The dust on the guitar strings was thick enough to write your name in, and somehow that felt like proof. You start things, you don't finish them, and you're running out of excuses. You look around your space, and it almost feels like a quiet crime scene. Half-built ideas everywhere. A website that still says coming soon. Baking tools you swore you'd master. A random phase where you watch jiu-jitsu tutorials at 2 a.m. like your life depended on it. And underneath all of it, there's this low, constant pressure in your chest. Like you've done something wrong just by being this way. People don't even have to say it anymore. You already know the word they'd use. Scattered, unfocused, maybe even a dilettante. Here's the thing, you start believing it. You start telling yourself that you lack discipline, that you're somehow broken because you can't stay in one lane. You repeat that phrase in your head, jack of all trades, master of none, like it's some kind of verdict. But what's wild is you've probably never even heard the full version of it, because the part they leave out completely changes the meaning. It ends with, but oftentimes better than a master one. And that missing piece? That's where everything shifts. But that's only the surface of what's actually going on. When you zoom in a little deeper, psychology paints a completely different picture. That restless feeling, that urge to explore new things. It's not a flaw. It's what happens when your nervous system is highly adaptive. Your brain isn't failing at focus. It's scanning, mapping, preparing. There's even a name for the kind of mind you're slowly building without realizing it. An M-shaped mind. Not a straight line of expertise, but multiple peaks of depth connected by curiosity. And honestly, that changes everything. Because anxiety you feel, it doesn't come from your nature. It comes from a lie you were taught. For decades, the world rewarded people who specialized deeply in one thing. It was like a predictable game, like practicing the same golf swing over and over until you mastered it. Stable rules, clear outcomes. If you stayed consistent long enough, you'd win. But your brain knows something your environment hasn't caught up to yet. We're not living in that kind of world anymore. What we're in now is what psychologists call a wicked environment, a system where rules change constantly, where what works today can become useless tomorrow. And in that kind of environment, specialists aren't always strong, they're fragile. Because if their one skill becomes irrelevant, they don't have anywhere to go. So you drift. 1 year you're deep into something technical. The next you're chasing something creative. And then suddenly you're learning something completely random that no one else understands. From the outside, it looks messy. People might even laugh it off or question your direction. But what they don't see is what your brain is actually doing behind the scenes. And this is where it gets interesting. Psychology calls it far transfer. Most specialists rely on something called near transfer. They solve familiar problems with familiar tools. But you do something different. You take ideas from completely unrelated fields and connect them in ways that shouldn't work, but somehow do. That's where innovation comes from. That's how new perspectives are born. Think about it for a second. Someone who's coded their whole life might build efficient systems. But someone who's coded and also spent years understanding nature, patterns, growth cycles, they don't just build systems, they design ecosystems. That's a different level of thinking. And yet, you still feel like an imposter because you're measuring yourself with the wrong metric. You're looking at depth and thinking you don't have enough of it. But your real strength isn't depth alone. It's synthesis. It's the way you combine things other people would never think to connect. But even when you understand that, it doesn't immediately fix the weight you carry. Because there's still that moment, you know the one, when you see people your age moving ahead in a straight line. Titles, promotions, clear paths. And you feel like you're stuck at the beginning, restarting over and over again. I'm not proud of this, but that comparison can mess with your head in a real way. And that's because you're misunderstanding the shape of your own growth. Most people are taught to be T-shaped, broad knowledge with one deep specialty. But that's not you. You're building something different. Multiple areas of depth connected over time. That's the M shape. But here's the trap almost nobody talks about. You can't build every pillar at once. If you try, if you wake up one day and decide you're going to master business, learn coding, write a book, and get in shape all at the same time, you burn out fast. And then it reinforces that belief that you can't follow through. But that's not the truth. The real strategy, the one that actually works, is something called serial mastery. It means you focus deeply on one thing for a season of your life. Not forever, just long enough to build something real. Then you shift, not because you failed, but because that season is complete. And when you look at your life like that, everything starts to make sense. There was a story I came across about someone in their 50s who finally understood this. For years, they felt torn between art and programming, like choosing one meant betraying the other. But eventually, they stopped trying to force a single identity. They let programming handle stability, pay the bills, create space, and then they gave their creative interests room to breathe on the side. They even turned down high-pressure leadership roles just to protect their energy. At first glance, it might look like they were holding themselves back, but in reality, they were designing a life that actually worked for them. Over time, those separate interests didn't stay separate. They started blending naturally into projects that were uniquely theirs. That's how the M shape comes alive. But there's one more layer to this, and it might be the most important one. From an evolutionary standpoint, what you're doing isn't random, it's strategic. Nature has a concept called redundancy. It means having multiple layers of protection instead of relying on a single point of failure. For example, certain animals survive better because they have backup systems. If one fails, another takes over. Your interests? That's your redundancy. If your entire identity is tied to one skill, and that skill disappears or becomes irrelevant, it hits you like a collapse. But if you spent years exploring different domains, building different abilities, even casually, you're not stuck. You pivot, you adapt, and that makes you incredibly resilient. So maybe those unfinished projects weren't failures. Maybe they were investments. Maybe each one gave you a piece of something you'll use later, in a way you can't even predict yet. And when you really sit with that, the shame starts to fade. Because you realize you were never meant to fit into one narrow definition. You weren't built to stay in one lane forever. You were built to move between worlds, to connect things, to see patterns others miss. And maybe the real question isn't why you can't stick to one thing. Maybe it's this. If the world keeps pushing people to specialize, but the future rewards those who can adapt, connect, and evolve, who's actually ahead? Subscribe now to understand psychology, creativity, and personal growth better.